Dragons in early video games. Dragons' entry into the world of video games took place around the same time that these amazing reptiles started making their way into movies and books. Starting in the early 1980s, these mythological creatures began appearing in various forms of digital entertainment. The 8-bit and 16-bit era, represented by consoles such as the Atari 2600, Commodore 64, NES and Sega Genesis, introduced dragons as antagonists in many titles. Adventure, for the Atari 2600, one of the first adventure video games, presented players with the challenge of defeating dragons. Similarly, Dragon's Lair, an arcade game from 1983, offered a unique challenge, with its gameplay based on animated sequences and the heroic Dirk the Bold who had to save Princess Daphne from a dragon. Since the technology of the time was limited, the representation of these dragons was often simple. However, despite the graphical limitations, these games have managed to capture the imagination of players, often through challenging gameplay and engaging storytelling. As video game technology progressed, the dragons in these games also became more and more complex. Some games, such as the Final Fantasy series, have introduced dragons as final bosses or powerful enemies, requiring players to use specific strategies and skills to defeat them. In others, such as the Dragon Quest series, dragons were central characters, often with their own personalities and histories. This look back shows how dragons have been a constant in the world of video games since the early days of the medium. And as we will see in the next section, this trend has not abated in the following decades. Conversely, with the arrival of role-playing games, RPGs, dragons got an even bigger stage to shine, becoming more and more central to the gameplay and storyline of countless titles. Dragons in RPGs. In the late 1980s and throughout the 1990s, the role-playing game, RPG, genre began to take hold, bringing with it a variety of new ways to represent dragons. With a more complex storyline and more in-depth gameplay, these games gave dragons a much more significant role than previous titles. A case in point is the Dungeons & Dragons series, initially a board game, but later adapted into a series of RPG video games. As the name suggests, dragons have been an important part of the D&D world from the beginning, appearing as powerful antagonists or, in some cases, allies or playable characters. Similarly, the Elder Scrolls series is another example of an RPG where dragons play a prominent role. In the 5th chapter, Skyrim, dragons are not only enemies to fight, but also a central part of the plot. The player character is a dragonborn, capable of learning the language of dragons and using powerful shouts, or shouts, to fight. The RPG genre has allowed dragons to be given a deeper and more complex role, with their own personalities, stories, and motivations. This complexity has made dragons even more appealing to players, allowing them to interact with these creatures in ways beyond just combat. Dragons aren't limited to RPGs, however. In the next paragraph, we will explore how these mythical creatures also found their way into action-adventure games, once again proving their versatility and timeless appeal in the world of video games. Dragons in action and adventure games. In the digital gaming arena, these mythical beings have had a significant impact, especially in the action-adventure genre. Their appearances in these titles often provide moments of high tension and emotion, whether they are adversaries to fight or powerful allies to ride. Iconic examples can be found in popular titles like The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim, and God of War. In Skyrim, the presence of dragons is central to the storyline, with the player embodying a Dovahkiin, or a Dragon Eater, a human being with a dragon's soul, capable of using their powers, called screams. This generates a unique dynamic that alternates the leisurely exploration of Nordic landscapes with intense battles against these huge flying creatures. In the case of God of War, the dragon is a sizable boss that the player must face. Its grandeur and power combine to create an intense and unforgettable gaming experience, making this encounter one of the highlights of the game. Also, games like Spyro the Dragon show us a different approach. Spyro, the protagonist, is a young and energetic dragon that the player controls to explore vast worlds, solve puzzles, and defeat enemies. While having a lighter and more imaginative tone, this game has left an indelible mark on the genre. Finally, it is worth mentioning Dragon's Dogma, in which the encounter with the dragon is an event of great narrative impact, and the player's choice during this encounter will significantly affect the course of the story. Draconic presences in action-adventure games aren't limited to these few mentions, and they will surely continue to influence game design in the future. However, it's not just action-adventure games that take advantage of the image and power of dragons. The following paragraph will explore how these mythical creatures have also left their mark on strategy games. Dragons in strategy games. Strategy games often offer the ability to control huge armies, lead entire nations, or build civilizations from scratch. It is only natural that in these contexts, these mythical creatures have found a prominent place, often as powerful units or final bosses. Take, for example, the famous Warcraft series. In these games, dragons play important roles in the story and gameplay, appearing as powerful combat units, bosses, or support characters. In Warcraft 3, dragons can be summoned as flying units that can deal massive damage and resist many attacks. Another title that deserves mention is Heroes of Might and Magic 3, where dragons are among the strongest units a player can have. They are divided into several element-based classes such as fire, earth, water, and air, each with its own unique abilities and perks. In the mobile game, Clash of Clans, dragons are elite units available to players who have reached a certain level. These mighty beings can destroy entire enemy villages with their fire breath, making them valuable assets in attack strategies. Finally, Age of Mythology features dragons as mythical units that can be summoned by players who worship certain gods. These creatures have unique abilities that can turn the tide of battle and offer players new strategies to defeat their opponents. In each of these examples, dragons are not only powerful units to be used in battle, but also central figures in the game world, influencing the player's plot and strategic decisions. This reflects how these mythical creatures continue to inspire and influence video game creators. But dragons aren't limited to strategy games. In the next section, we'll explore how these creatures have influenced another popular genre, virtual card and board games. Dragons in virtual card and board games. The field of virtual card and board games sees the presence of dragon figures in a leading role. Often, these legendary creatures are used as powerful cards or tokens, adding a level of excitement and strategy to the game. For example, in the popular trading card game Hearthstone, dragons are a subtype of cards that offer unique and powerful abilities. Some decks of cards are built around these creatures, using them as the driving force behind game strategies. They are also a central element in some of the game's expansions, such as Descent of Dragons, which introduces new dragons and thematic cards. The famous card game Magic: The Gathering also boasts a remarkable assortment of dragon cards. Many dragons in this game are powerful and expensive to play, but offer disruptive abilities that can turn the tide of a game. They are often used as strengths in decks and as hubs around which to build complex strategies. In virtual board games, such as Tabletop Simulator, dragons often appear as detailed, artistically drawn pawns. These games recreate the experience of traditional board games in a virtual environment, and dragons are a popular element in many game pieces. These examples demonstrate the importance and influence of dragons in virtual card and board games. Their presence not only adds an element of fantasy and drama to the game, but also introduces unique strategies and tactics. Despite the differences between the various games, one thing is clear: the image of the dragon as a powerful and majestic creature is central to their design and gameplay.